when we consider that it's 100 years old and we consider the challenges that it's facing now, what I find really amazing about the industry is that it still collectively comes together to celebrate what it's doing, but also to look critically at what else it has to do and moves forward together. It's very rare to see that kind of collective decision making at an industry level, and I think will stand us in good stead in the future.
That's Georgie Pengilly setting the scene for our second episode celebrating 100 years of growing rice in Australia. I'm Michael Thompson and you're listening to Unearthed, an AgriFutures podcast celebrating the great minds of Australian agriculture. In episode 1, we talked about how the rice industry in Australia grew from a backyard crop to become a world leader. Today, we're going to look to the future and the industry's goal of harvesting 1.5 tonnes of rice for every megalitre of water used. We'll hear about new rice varieties that are cold tolerant, and we'll revisit a pair of champion rice growers testing new technology for irrigation. And if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify and you enjoyed the archival footage from episode 1, you're going to love the video for this episode. The famous Sunrise Rice-mation ads from the 80s and 90s will be featured in the video version of the pod. I absolutely love these clips. But let's start with Georgie Pengilly, Chief Executive of Rice Breeding Australia, who says the keys to success will be collaboration, innovation and adaptation.
Rice Breeding Australia was established 3 years ago by the industry for the industry. And so when we think about what Rice Breeding Australia is about, we are about breeding new and improved rice varieties for the Australian rice industry. So your listeners would understand that water policy and water productivity is really critical in the riverina. And so one of the critical things we need to do is to be able to deliver varieties to the industry that will allow them to be able to use the water that they have to the best of their ability.
So water has been a focal point for the rice industry, for decades now. How much gain has breeding delivered the industry in terms of water efficiency, and how much more do you think there is to go?
Look, there's a significant amount still to go. I think the transition that the industry did 3 years ago to form RBA as a breeding company to transform rice breeding to deliver exactly that, water productivity gains, means that we've actually still got a lot to do. So breeding is one component of how the industry will actually achieve those water productivity goals that it needs to. The industry, through the AgriFutures Rice RD&E strategic plan, set an ambitious goal of 1.5 tonnes per megalitre, and so that is what we are driving towards. And so genetics is probably at least 50% of that component, but along with that we need the right agronomy packages for the growers. We need automation so that they can irrigate the right way. We need weed control because the system will be completely different. It won't be flooded anymore. So there's a whole of industry effort that has to go into how the rice industry will actually achieve this.
Even visually, when people think about rice, if we're not talking about flooded irrigation, what does the future of the rice industry look like in a physical sense?
So in a physical sense, what we're talking about is, if you're going to be driving past a rice field, it's going to look similar to what a cotton field looks like. So there'll be furrow irrigation. It'll be growing in what we call an aerobic environment, so where we run water through the system, but it's never actually ponded. And one of the critical things that the breeding program needs to do is to breed cold tolerant rice, because the reason why we pond it is it provides an electric blanket for the rice. It doesn't like the cold, and so we have to breed cold tolerance into it so we can actually remove that ponded water.
That's a big, bold vision that Georgie Pengilly is describing, and it's not something that's just been dreamed up overnight. Remember those key words of collaboration, innovation and adaptation? Well, the AgriFutures Rice RD&E panel is responsible for setting the direction. It's important to note that it's made up of growers, extension and business advisors and researchers. Christopher Blanchard from Charles Sturt University is the chair of the panel.
When a rice grower grows his crop and sells it, a portion of what he gets goes into a pool, which is largely matched by the federal government, and then that money is invested in R&D for the industry. And so AgriFutures manages those investments, and AgriFutures engages an external advisory panel to help make decisions around where that money is invested. And so that's the panel that I chair. And I'm really pleased to say that we've got an amazing group of people on that panel with all different backgrounds and expertise, which I know is going to make sure that we make the very best decisions in investing growers' R&D money. We don't have as big a budget as some of the other RDCs, so every decision that we make is so important. We've got to make sure that every dollar that we invest has the maximum impact. So for me, that means having the very best processes around making those investments, and that's what I'm aiming to do.
Chris has been a rice researcher for 25 years now, contributing ideas and solutions as dramatic changes in the industry have unfolded. When I spoke to Chris, he had just arrived at the centenary celebrations at the Australian Rice Conference in Leeton, New South Wales.
So I was just thinking about that driving over this morning, and driving past the paddock. The landscape has changed so much since I started making the trek over here to Leeton, and some of the big changes that I've seen is these big white things in the paddock, which is cotton bales, which I never used to see. All these nut trees that have emerged over here. So it really shows the how this area has evolved and different crops have come and go. And of course, that's all had an impact on the rice industry because I guess the real driver here is water. And so all of those crops are competing for the same water.
So far, we've talked a lot about the role of water in the rice industry, but this is a significant point that hasn't been mentioned yet. It's not just about the availability of water and maximising rice yield. There's also an economic fabric woven into the landscape too. Farmers are going to choose to grow the crop type that will deliver the maximum financial return from that water.
Comparing traditional sort of practices versus aerobic type practice, where actually we're really just sort of flushing the rice crop with water. And in just the past few years, the increase in water use efficiency has seen us use or be able to grow at least 50% more rice with the same amount of water. And that's enormous. That has such an impact on this area. It means that we can continue to grow good rice crops on less water.
So that's one way of measuring it is just the gross volume of water, and you mentioned also the yield that comes from that. The other way of measuring it is dollars per meg. We're seeing, despite the less water being available and the yields obviously going up, but what does that mean for the dollars in the pocket for the growers?
Well, the other part of the equation, Michael, around dollars per megalitre is so it's not just yield, but it's also the value of the crop. And one of the things that the Australian rice industry has always focused on is making sure that it produces the best quality rice in the world. And because they've continued to do that, uh, we've been able to sell our rice into the highest value markets. So with a combination of those high yields and those high prices, rice is still a very viable crop to grow in this irrigated region.
To keep delivering high returns to growers, the process for selling rice is also undergoing a major change. Rice is following the likes of wheat and sugar 20 years ago in dismantling its single desk selling, which Rice Growers Association CEO Graham Kruger believes will open doors to new markets.
So just this year, New South Wales, a piece of legislation called the Rice Marketing Act, it's been fully deregulated. It was always deregulated in Australia. It had a quirk to it. They used to call them single desks. We were one of the first single desks, and we're now the last in Australia. And as of the end of June this year, it's gone. So deregulation means that the farmers or the industry is having to adapt, and the RGA has been working very closely with the various industry pillars as well as government to what does that transition look like. So that's one. Number two, obviously making sure that we represent the whole industry. Growers up in the northern rivers. The Riverina is the largest sort of footprint of rice growing in Australia, and so it's giving people a level of confidence that this deregulation is not going to break us. It's actually it's opening up doors and new opportunities, and we need to embrace those new opportunities.
Regardless of the challenges presented by deregulation, Graham says that Sunrise will continue to be an integral part of the Australian industry, including as a financial partner in Rice Breeding Australia, alongside the Rice Growers Association and AgriFutures.
1930, a group of growers got together because they were frustrated with the Millers Association, and they pooled their resources, built their own mill, and built their own industry, which is now a wonderful Australian success story that I would encourage people to try and understand more. But then in 1950, those growers got together and built the Rice Growers Cooperative, which is now known as Sunrise today. And it's one of the largest rice companies in the world now. It's got mills in California, Papua New Guinea, and yes, built out of my members. So, and yes, it's an ASX listed company now. It's almost the analogy that I like to use. It's the child. The thing that you wish for your child is to do better and bigger things than you, and then to go and make its own story. And it's exactly what Sunrise does. We don't dictate or direct anything that Sunrise does anymore, but it's still part of our industry. We collaborate very, very closely. We partner with them on our conferences, on our research, and equally so with AgriFutures. So I'd say there's a partnership structure that the industry has done really well to build.
Chris Blanchard agrees, but highlights a couple of new challenges that it will create for our plant breeders.
I think it presents a great opportunity for the industry because we've got more players coming into the market with different interests. So I guess historically, Sunrise has focused very much on that bulk export market into particular high value markets, which has been amazing. But I think now with changes to the marketing arrangements, there's the opportunity for others players to come in and maybe occupy those niche areas. So that might be things like the coloured rice varieties or low GI rice or rice with a higher nutrient density, things that consumers might pay a premium for, and potentially that will deliver higher prices back to growers.
So describe for me what quality looks like then. If we're getting a quality differential on the market, what are the traits that achieve that premium?
Well, there are many, but probably at a base level, one of the most important things that we focus on is head rice yield. And so what that really means is how many brokens or broken grains that you might find after milling. And that's a really key character that we have selected to make sure that when customers are buying a bag of rice, what they're mostly seeing is whole rice grains. So that's, I guess, the baseline standard. But the other things that are really important for quality is cooking properties. So people don't want to cook rice and try and bite into it and for it to be, really tough. So there's a real need to strike that balance between something that a rice grain that stays together during cooking, but is nice and soft when you bite into it. And people probably haven't thought much about this, but there's a lot of very complicated genetics in behind those traits. And because the rice breeding program have adopted the most advanced breeding techniques to be able to use DNA markers to select for those traits, then we are sure that the varieties that are coming out will have the right texture because we've selected the right genes to deliver that texture.
It's one of those things, there's incredible science in behind that, but it's one of those things a lot of consumers just would go, rice is rice is rice, isn't it? Isn't it all just the same? But there's obviously been a dramatic change in what we're consuming.
Yeah, look, I've got to be honest, and before I started working in the rice industry, actually, to me, rice was rice. A typical Australian, I guess we all thought just rice, was rice. But since then, I've had the opportunity to learn about all the different types of rice that we grow, not just here in Australia but overseas as well, and having, I guess, interacted with some of our international colleagues who have more of a rice culture, I've really learnt just how important those quality attributes are, and particularly for our export markets, it's so important that we are hitting those quality traits so that we can maintain those markets.
Is it possible to continue to achieve those quality standards when using less water, particularly if the water is no longer available for long periods? It might just be coming down in pulses, depending on availability. How do you juggle all of those competing stresses?
Yeah, so that's absolutely one of the sort of, approaches in our uh, AgriFutures funded research is looking at ways that we can use less water, but also maintaining the quality, because there's no point us going down a track that uses less water but delivers poor quality. So anything that we do in our rice systems going forward has to maintain or improve the quality of the rice that we're producing. So I was so excited this morning to hear our rice breeder Chris Proud talk about some of the progress that they're making to help fix this problem. So, as you mentioned, the reason that we often grow rice in deep water is to protect it from the cold temperatures at night. And that's because our rice varieties are very susceptible to that cold weather, which will cause sterility and a massive reduction in yield under some conditions. So if we can develop varieties that are resistant to that cold weather, then we can probably reduce the amount of water we use by about 20%.
Yeah,
And so
wow.
the really exciting thing that we heard from Chris is that they've identified two markers, which has come from the University of Queensland pre-breeding program, that is going to help select varieties which are resistant to that. But they've got another 3 or 4 or 5 other markers that in combination will make a transformational change in the ability for us to grow rice that is protected from those cold temperatures. So straight away, when we have that, we will see a massive reduction in our requirement for water.
Cold tolerance is a central focus, but it's just one piece in a complicated puzzle. In fact, it reminds me of those tricky little balance board games that we used to play as kids, where you need to roll 5 different ball bearings into 5 different holes all at once. And as soon as you get one in there, you tilt it the other way and the first ball comes loose. Trying to get all 5 in at once is really, really hard. But rather than just focus on one piece of the puzzle at any one time, Georgie Pengilly is rethinking the entire challenge.
So I think it's important to understand that rice is part of the farming system. And so when we talk about water use, we talk about water use for individual crops. When we talk about water productivity, we are talking about what does the farming system look like? How productive is it per megalitre of water? And so when we look at how do we transition industries and growers, and in this case rice growers, whatever they transition into has to be profitable for them, so it has to be productive. You can't have productivity if it's not going to be profitable, because you still don't have an industry. So that's where there's been this big shift in language from water use to actually water productivity and getting the most out of every megalitre that they use.
So we're really talking dollars earned for each megalitre.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, okay. And I'm guessing that's going to give farmers of all descriptions much more informed choice about how they manage their rotations and the crops that they're growing. And
that's exactly right. And what we're starting to see now is growers actually looking at their rotations and looking at their water use over, say, a 24 to 36 month period in their crop rotation cycle, as opposed to just looking at rice by itself or just looking at winter crop by itself.
because like you said earlier, it's not just the genetics at play here, there's agronomic factors, and that all feeds into that whole of farming system approach.
Yes.
So going back to the research end of the equation and those shorter timelines, I hear you'll be taking the ribbon off a brand new present sometime in the coming years to speed that up even further.
Yes, that's right. So we've just commenced work on a breeding facility based in Leeton. So this will be the first time the rice industry has actually owned its own breeding facility, and we'll be able to control the use of that and how it gets used into the future. So that's very exciting. We'll be building a glass house and an enclosed nursery and, offer some processing facility. And I think the critical reason for that is in breeding, you need large numbers to have success and to have genetic gain. And when we look at what the industry has to do and the short time frames and the urgency around what it needs to achieve for water productivity, having those facilities is the only way we can actually deliver to industry in a time frame that's going to be acceptable.
So you talk about pre-breeding and breed. There's many stages to breeding a new variety, isn't there?
That's
and
right.
Once upon a time, it was in the 10 plus years from identifying a trait to actually seeing it in the paddock. I mean, what's the timeline look like now with modern technologies?
Look, the timelines sit really tight. And so I think what we're looking at now is, being able to deliver varieties in 7 years.
Wow.
And I think given that the rice industry really is on a burning platform around water productivity, we are working really hard with the current varieties to actually breed cold tolerance into those really fast. And so what we're seeing for this coming season is actually rice varieties hitting the field that were only born, so to speak, 18 months ago. And that is quick by any standard.
Rice growers Michael and Felicia Chalmers, who we met last episode, are at the southern end of the growing zone. So for their operation, breeding new cold-tolerant varieties is important for reducing both water use and boosting crop yields.
In our case, it's only ever the minimum amount of water that we need to cover each bay within that paddock. So generally about 5 centimetres, unless we have a cold weather event coming, which will increase that water depth. But in 2024, we didn't need that because it was a favourable summer. So no, it's not a great depth of water.
So given that you're at the southern end of the sort of the growing domain for the rice industry, how important is that research investment that's currently going on into cold tolerance and new varieties?
Yeah,
it's a big one for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge for the southern area because we've always been at a tonne or a 2 tonne disadvantage just because the cumulative heat units here are so much, generally so much less than what they are in the northern growing area. So if we can get another couple of degrees of cold tolerance built into our rice varieties, that'll not only potentially give us higher yields without going to an aerobic system,
but on top of that,
if we can then go to an aerobic system, that then delivers the extra benefits of aerobic rice, by not needing to have permanent flooded water on that paddock.
That whole of farm transformation that Georgie Pengilly described earlier is well and truly underway at Michael and Felicia's property.
We've also gone into, tried to make our business more resilient to drought, but also to those regulatory changes that come through. So we've got more dryland cropping country now. We've moved to putting pivots in so that we can, pivots and lateral irrigators, so that we can water our cereals more efficiently. And it just means that across the business we've got more diversity and we can sort of handle those chops and changes in water availability
It means
slightly more readily.
We can be a bit more selective about how we use the whatever water resource we have that year. Yeah,
that's right.
The timing, the location, the volume of water, they're questions that demand precise answers. But the traditional method of opening and closing channels involves manually moving timber boards at all hours of the day and night across the farm. So the Chalmers are this year trialling a new automated method, which they hope will deliver on all of those fronts.
If it works, it could be a real game changer. And I mean, you'll never not go around the rice.
That's right.
The economic thresholds sort of mean that you do need to be there, reasonably often to make sure things are going as they should. But taking that 3 or 4 hours a day out of the management by having that automated will be huge.
Less getting up in the night?
Hopefully. For rice, you're not usually out and about in the middle of the night. But especially, if we go to an aerobic system where, flushing would be fairly regular, then that's where this automation will really come into its own. I mean, it'll be great in the short term. And at the moment, it's really interesting. It's a huge novelty to see it happen. And if we can automate a rice paddock to the point where we put water in at the top and recycle any tail water at the bottom without touching anything, that'll be a great achievement.
Yeah. We were joking this morning that we could be sitting on the Gold Coast running the rice water, but I think that's probably a bit far-fetched.
Keep the dream alive.
That's right.
So 100 years on, and the outlook is bright for Australia's rice industry. Don't just take my word for it. Let's finish the episode by giving the final word to our 95-year-old living legend, George Rathbone.
Oh, well, I'd certainly, if you could get into it, go for it, because it's a great crop to grow, and you get results for what you put into it. You can't, if you miss checking your water levels and all that, you can come unstuck a bit. So you've got to look after it, and I think it repays you if you do look after it.
That's George Rathbone rounding out our second episode celebrating 100 years of commercial rice production in Australia. Next time on Unearthed, we're looking at new and emerging crops that are being trialled to keep Australian agriculture productive and profitable as the climate changes. Surprisingly, the two crops that we're talking about, sesame and industrial hemp, are both keen to learn a lot from the success of the rice industry in adapting and innovating to grow more grain with less water. I'll tell you all about it next time on Unearthed, the People Changing Australian Agriculture, a podcast from AgriFutures Australia.